So, our speaker today, Lauren Zack, is currently a senior director at Autodesk, where she leads design for customer and employee-facing experiences across the Autodesk portfolio. She is also the former chief design officer for a tech startup that focused on creating machine learning models to enable real estate title and escrow requests, right? So she has a background in machine learning even before maybe all of us were using ChatGPT. She has more than 30 years of experience in research and design and has designed and led award-winning experiences. She is the author of How to Wrestle an Alligator. So if you want more wisdom from Lauren, I highly recommend her book. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to share with us today. Lauren, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danny. What an amazing welcome. I don't know if I can live up to it, but I will try. Yeah, everybody seeing my screen okay? And you can hear me? Fantastic. Great to meet those of you that I've not met before. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm thrilled to join the UX Researchers Guild today. And as Danny mentioned, I'm sort of a OG around UX research. I got my master's degree many years ago in human machine systems research, which, just felt like an incredibly off the wall degree to get. And now I just love the fact that you have this many members, this large of a community, and I fully support everything that you're doing. And I hope that today's talk will be inspirational for you. We have a bunch of time at the end for discussion and Q&A, and I'm really hoping to kind of set up this tale and then, have you all connecting to the content and thinking about ways that your job might really be impacted by AI, and ways that we can really up the usefulness of what we all do. So thanks again for letting me have the time today. And we'll just kind of jump into it. So very short agenda, just a few words about AI. I really want to tell you this tale. So we will do Once Upon a Time. I have some lessons learned, and they'll be summarized at the end. So for those of you that are screenshotting, there'll be a nice summary so you can grab that. And then I'd love to hear from you and discuss how this might resonate with you in your current roles, any questions that you might have. So we will get to it. First off, I don't want anyone thinking from the title of the talk, AI minus UX, that for some reason you think I don't love AI. I think AI is our future. And I think that we all have been reading the news and hearing from the Anthropic CEO recently about, sort of the coming tidal wave of AI work that is going to potentially impact what we do. And I think that it's just something that we all realize is coming in various different forms. So with that said, a caveat, I am not an expert on AI. So when I say AI in this talk, I really am talking about a very specific instance where we created models through machine learning and then use those models in order to do tasks perhaps faster, perhaps not, from the human operators. So I'm not talking about conversational design. I'm not talking about probabilistic design. There's a ton of other things we could talk about with AI. And again, if we want to in the discussion, happy to, but I don't want anyone coming away thinking, oh, I thought I was going to learn, some specific AI techniques, and that's not the case. So if you need to leave, feel free, but hopefully you're in the right spot. And so my tale, and I'm going to try to tell it in just a couple of slides, but I felt that this was such an important story and really kind of case study that I wanted to share it. So once upon a time, although it isn't really quite a fable, we had a company that some friends got together and had a great idea, which if you know Silicon Valley, you know that is something that we do a lot. And the idea behind this company was, let's use this new technology like machine learning to automate some very manual processes that take way too much time today and really slow down real estate transactions. And if we do that, we can, potentially save lots of time and lots of money on all different sides of the transaction. So the idea is that these machine learning models are going to be based on how humans do their work today. We're going to learn from humans. We're going to do it better than humans do it. And we're going to save a ton of money and a ton of time. And so I kept thinking about The Matrix, the movie, where people are, sort of hooked up to machines and we're kind of, taking their brains and understanding who they are and what they do. So I kind of had this mental image of that. But that was basically the model. It was, learn from the best, learn from the people doing this work, create systems that will really kind of take away some of those tasks. And so from that, a company was born. So based on this vision, we got some significant investment into create a modern development organization with product, engineering, UX, data. We set it up right. We hired some great leaders. We staffed the team with fantastic folks and really all rallied around this vision that machine learning could do better what humans are doing. And therefore, we can save and really revolutionize the industry. So, what could go wrong? Seems like a great idea. Seems like lots of good companies do this all the time. We went public with a unicorn billion-dollar evaluation, and yeah, should be great, right? So, first challenge. The processes that we were looking at were extremely complicated and had lots of different human and multiple system dependencies and touch points. The humans themselves had been in their jobs 20 plus years on average, with many more than 30. So these were folks that had developed really excellent, repeatable ways of working, and they knew and trusted the work that they did. So when folks like myself and other UX folks came along and said, "Hey, we need to create something so that we can understand the complexity of all of these interactions," we were told quite literally, "Lauren, this is too complicated to write down. We're just going to create these models. We're going to innovate. We're going to move fast. We're going to break things, and technology is going to solve a lot of these problems." So that was one challenge. Another was, we really emphasize creating a modern, seamless customer experience as that important touch point from a design perspective. We did not prioritize the employee experience of that interaction with the new machine learning models and processes. And so that was definitely an interesting challenge. I know that most of us, if not all of us, have really kind of um, absorbed and really kind of rallied around the idea that the customer experience is the most important thing. We are all measuring NPS and CES and other ways to think about our customers. We kind of were extreme in that regard, and that's challenge number two. Challenge number three, the company culture had a strong focus on experimentation, which is, again, usually a fantastic idea. I'm sure you guys have heard this in your jobs. I probably say this at least once a week, that we're building the plane while we're flying the plane. So that meant, though, that we are going to purposely create some disruption and that we're going to actually reward that and value that and encourage that. So, the title of that slide, What Could Go Wrong? I refrained from showing a plane crash because I didn't really want to go quite that extreme. But what went wrong with those challenges, and I'll use the plane analogy as one here. Imagine that you are building a plane while you're flying a plane. Is that a plane that you would want to be on as a passenger? Right? If we are experimenting with the landing gear or the primary navigation, or perhaps the oxygen that is going to be flowing in the event of an emergency, I'm thinking that that is not a plane that any of us would want to be passengers on. So when we talk about experimentation, and we're going to go through some examples now of what I learned from this experience and some things that I'm hoping that will be resonant for you as well. I think we have to think about how we experiment, how we build AI, how we use it, and how we can actually make it extremely successful for our purposes. So, not a plane crash, however, perhaps some emergency there. So, I don't know if people have been in the chat. I hope that you have been. I can't see it, but we're going to talk about it afterwards. That is my fable. Not really a fairy tale, but really a very, very interesting case study. So I'm going to go through the lessons that I learned and kind of go back through it now. The first is a strong UX team, great organizational design. We had product and engineering and design all reporting up to the same leader. Had great intentions, but it didn't guarantee success. And so I think that's important with all of us who've been, I feel like UX evangelist is something that is probably, the best description of my job for the last 20 plus years. I feel like I'll never stop evangelizing for how important UX is. But even when you get there, even when you get that right organizational design and you get leadership from the top down believing in UX, it doesn't necessarily guarantee success. We talked a little bit about experimentation, but I'm going to mention it a couple more times. I believe that experimentation is foundational to the successful implementation of AI-based experiences. I think we must experiment. And I think the way to do that well is to start with a strong hypothesis. So it's not experimentation on everything, and it's not experimentation without some really careful ideas and thoughts and wanting to test different hypotheses. And the way that you get those strong hypotheses is with data. So in our example, one of the things that we should have been looking at was, a hypothesis around the way that humans would be working with the system, right? We were testing out whether the models were returning good data, but we weren't necessarily testing the way that humans would be interacting with that data. And so that is a huge miss in terms of which hypothesis we're testing and then what data we needed. This was a really important one. Complexity is just never a good excuse for, I'll call it irresponsible or reckless experimentation. So if you're told a process is too complex to explain, to document, to understand, how will you possibly design a good system? So I think that, you can't trial and error your way into that sort of good enough design. So again, I hope that many of you are right now thinking the words, service blueprint is flashing in your brain, right? Ways that we can take very complex systems and describe them in ways that will then be useful to our research community, to our design community, to our product community. I think that is a really important excuse that is sometimes given for systems that we're trying to automate. They're too complex. We've been doing this process for 30 years. We can't possibly slow down enough to map it all out. So we're just going to continue to experiment. I'm thinking this is probably resonating with some of you. This is a really important one as well. We all have been living and breathing and advocating for how important our customer experience is. However, I think we don't necessarily think about what that customer experience might depend on. So in this case, the employee experience, those human operators that were working behind the scenes to help people to conduct real estate transactions, to buy and sell their homes, to get their mortgages, were incredibly important to ultimately the customer experience. And so we talk a lot about, designing things end to end. So it is, with the user in mind, with the customer in mind, and what touch points they will have. But looking at the back end of the experience is incredibly important, and sometimes might be the most important thing that we're looking at. So I remember having conversations about this, and in my current role as well, thinking about how do we think end to end and then front to back. How do we think about what the front end of that experience is and all the things that ladder to it and all the humans that need to be designed for? And then the importance of trust. And then this is really interesting. We've all used some of the earlier AI models where, all of a sudden something is hallucinating or giving you back bad data. And as soon as you get some data that you don't necessarily believe in, that trust is eroded. And so for me, one of the things that really went south on this particular project was that the human operators didn't trust what the machine learning algorithms were delivering. And so some of you can probably guess already what happened. Here are people who've been doing the same job for 20 plus years, are expert at it, and all of a sudden are getting information from different sources that they may or may not find reliable. So very good employees they went and validated. So instead of doing their process as they were used to, that was taking quite a long time, they then removed time from the system by having the machine learning algorithms do the work. And then the humans went back and validated that that work had been done and done well. So you can guess what happened. Instead of decreasing the amount of time and the amount of cost for each transaction, we actually increased it. So had we done nothing, we were better off than the way that we wound up implementing this first generation of these systems. And I believe that really came down to this one critical item. And so, as a group of researchers, I would ask you, how do you measure trust? Right? Trust is a really interesting objective. And we never want to have, objectives that we can't measure. So I think measuring trust is a really important and new frontier, and maybe a little bit customizable based on the specific situation that you're trying to measure. But I think there might be some foundational things that go across different ML systems, different AI systems, where we start to think about how to build that trust, how to measure it, how to improve and iterate on it, so that we can get to a situation where we are then truly changing processes and making them better and faster. And then this is maybe my favorite one. And we talked a little bit about UX evangelism before, being relentless. So I believe that much of what we do in UX research is in order to de risk investments, right? So often we will have a caveat when we do a readout and we say, this was a, not large enough sample size in order to be predictive, right? We're not going to be able to say in the market, this is exactly what we're going to see in terms of behavior. But we're able to say, hey, I've learned these things. I have these insights. We have a hypothesis now. We should go and iterate and test it out. Um, Anything that we do in UX research in this field, I think, is going to ladder back to de-risking these investments. So again, I'm hoping that you're thinking already about the types of research that you do and the artifacts that you produce, service blueprints, working in journey management, getting insights through qualitative methods. And I love that your next speaker is going to be talking about some quantitative methods. That's fantastic. I think any and all of these and more are going to be invaluable as we create for the future. So, when we were talking about the Anthropic CEO who recently was talking about how maybe many of the roles that we know today may not be the same in the future, I think that as I see it, UX research becomes even more important, right? And if you think about this cautionary tale, had we been able to, map out parts of the system that we were then automating to develop trust metrics and know that we shouldn't ship an MVP until we had enough trust in the system that our operators truly would be more efficient and effective. Had we built in time to go from an MVP to an MLP, a minimum lovable product, and then had we created that customer experience on the front end that was deeply dependent on all of these items, I feel like we would have been successful earlier. So yeah, I think that my rally cry is that as a community, we go forward with confidence, conviction, and a sense of adventure. I mean, AI again, it's I keep reading about how scary it is. If you notice that I might look a little different from my mugshot on the front screen, that was created with AI. I thought it looked better than the original, so I used it. I think it's something to just continue to be experimenting with and feel that sense of adventure rather than being worried or scared of it. And again, I think that you all have an incredible role to play in the really successful implementation of AI. I think there's going to be more and more tales coming very soon about companies that invested in AI and were not able to see the results that they were hoping for. And so I think the more that you all can amplify your voices within your own companies, the more successful your companies will be, and the more case studies that we'll be sharing 6 months to a year from now that are the flip side of this, that are the positive. We did these things, it wasn't going to be successful, now it is. Here's what we learned, here's what we keep growing on, here are the types of techniques we had to use. So I'm excited for those talks, and I will be in attendance and hopefully even have one or two to share with you in the coming years. So, with that, I would love to just kind of summarize, and I'll leave this up, the money slide, in terms of the lessons that I learned and that I hope that we can have some conversation about. So, the first is again, a strong UX team is table stakes. Right. I think that there's not, anyone that would argue with that on this call, but again, always important to look at when you're looking at a company. Experiment responsibly, not recklessly, and you start with that data-driven hypothesis. Embrace complexity. Don't run away from it. Don't say that things are too hard to understand. Take pieces, use our techniques, really deeply understand that. And that goes to the next one, which is, without that deep understanding, we're not going to be able to optimize both for the humans and the machines in the system. I think again, trust is critically important. Think about it like other OKRs. Spend time with the definition. Get some stakeholder investment in it. I don't think that this community owns that metric. I think it's a shared metric. So I would really be interested in how people are defining it and measuring it. And then being relentless and employing UX research techniques. I listed a few here that would have been very, very important in this particular tale, but of course there are many. So I'd love to understand from you what you're finding it to be useful. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions. I'm going to go back to my lessons learned just because I think it's a good springboard, and I will let Danny pose the questions, and either from chat or things where people want to jump in.
Yes. Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Lauren. That story I think resonates with a lot of folks, and we have many comments in the chat around developing trust and echoing your sentiment around trust being an important foundation. Without it, things can go terribly wrong. So folks are definitely with you on that. Um, One question that came up for me while folks are dropping their thoughts in the chat and such. I wonder with this experimentation, this I think you said reckless experimentation kind of culture in this situation. Where do you feel the line is between? I mean, you mentioned starting with the hypothesis, but there's this bias for action message that a lot of us get, and I think we can rally around that to some extent. I see the pros and cons of that. Where do you think the line is between that bias for doing and experimenting and really being thoughtful about the direction you're heading in when you take actions?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of that, Danny. I love the question. The first is, again, that understanding complexity of really being thoughtful about which piece of the system you're experimenting with, right? And so, I think that the more that we understand what we're designing for, the more we'll be able to answer that, responsibly, right? And to be able to say, hey, we're going to manipulate this little piece of the process right here. We're not touching anything else. Um, that's what this experiment is designed for. And then I think the second part is, using some really sound experimentation techniques in order to reduce risk. So, for example, my plain example about, not maybe working on the landing gear for the first time when you have a plane in flight. Similarly, we do A/B testing all the time, right? In terms of a website. So we don't want to bring a website down, but if we did, we hope that it's for a very, very, very small group of people and not, the majority of the folks. So I think it's really understanding your business model and saying, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that our customers are supported today and tomorrow? Where can we responsibly experiment and where must we do it in a sandbox or some other way so that it's not, in a live system or really going to have a business impact that we haven't accounted for. I've heard before people talking about, instead of an A/B test, maybe it's an ABC. When we use a sandbox in order to, experiment without, living on the live system. And then I've actually worked on projects that have developed an MVP, and the engineering teams would agree that this is MVP. We have features that we agreed produce, and we've produced them, but perhaps it doesn't lead to an MLP, a minimum lovable product. And so sometimes companies keep that behind a firewall until they're ready to say this is now is good enough for public consumption, right? We feel confident now that we've tested this enough that we're not going to deprecate anything, we're not going to impact people's business negatively, and we have confidence about product market fit or other measures that we're interested in. So I think it's understanding those things. It's not every product needs an MLP first off. We do need to bias for action, but I think it's, again, getting the right people in the room and having those conversations, in my experience, generally yields good results. I think it's just that sometimes we don't have those conversations. We just move fast without the conversation. I've always maintained that I don't think that UX research actually slows down any end dates on projects. It just reprioritizes the way that we work on them. So I think, again, coming up with really great briefs and explanation for the work that we're doing and showing how we can do it in parallel, then kind of releases that tension of we have to move fast. It's like, yep, we're going to move fast, but we're going to do it in a way that also makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. And to dive in a little deeper, we had a question in the chat related to minimum lovable products. Any advice you have for advocating for MLPs in a culture that may be obsessed with MVPs? How do we connect uh, the business outcomes to MLPs and
Yeah.
such?
Yeah, I think it's all about measurement, right? So, a lot of times people will use, NPS as their kind of gold standard. Our customers love us. They are willing to recommend to other folks that they use our products. So, if you take that as sort of an ultimate measure of MLP and work backwards and say, okay, so MVP is trying to do what exactly? Is it a proof of concept? Is it a first to market technology? Is it looking for a niche in the market and exploring that and seeing if there's really a business case there? Like, I think that just defining the reasons for the MVP help then differentiate it from the MLP. And again, you don't always need an MLP. MVP might be totally the first thing and the best thing that you can get out in that amount of time. But I think it's just, again, having the sense of de-risking that decision by having some knowledge. And again, this is where I think trust is going to be one of the most important measures, right? So if you say that MVP includes trust, right, we're not going to put out anything that our customers don't trust. And it's where this experimentation gets really interesting. So, I've worked in fintech and I've worked in healthcare tech, and those are two areas highly regulated. And really, you have to be so careful when you make changes because, there's money transacting, and you wouldn't want me to experiment with your savings account balance, or you wouldn't want me to experiment with the way that we are giving doctors information so that they can do their diagnoses, right? So understanding, again, what you need to be successful in that, even MVP, gets to that conversation around then what's the difference between that and MLP.
Great. So that measurement piece, which is a theme, I think everyone's on board with in this call.
Talking to researchers about measurement, kind of like a no-brainer.
Yeah, music to my ears. Um, I want to dig into knowing you. I know that employee experience as a driver for customer experience is something you really live by. I'd be curious to hear more about how that connection has been drawn for you and any other ways folks can advocate for improving employee experience as a driver of customer experience in their situations.
Yeah, I think it comes down to understanding the connection, and sometimes it's very direct, like in this example that we just went through, right? There was a very direct connection between the way that the human operators needed to do their work and then what the customers would see. In other examples, it may not be as direct. And so I think that one of the ways to ensure that we're going to get a good outcome is to kind of explore that connection, right? It may be that there are things that we are producing that really have no human employee touch points, but I think those are hard to find. So if you think about customer success, even if you are doing sort of a digital first motion, and we are, solving a lot of problems today with more of chatbot or, an agentic interface. There's still humans who have figured out what the most important problems are to solve, how they can deliver that information with respect to messaging that is on brand and has the correct voice and tone. There's a human element to it that is really an employee element. So I think that it's really about understanding where the employees fit into a specific solution, and then just seeing where you need to really invest. So I don't think it's in every system. And there are some that we would think of as employee experiences entirely, right? So when I am using Workday or when I am using SAP, there's probably very little connection between those tasks and jobs to be done that I'm doing and the customer experience of one of our products. But when I'm, designing a system for our, support agents or, our customer success managers, then there's a much more direct connection between what that employee is seeing and doing and what our customers experience. So I think it's really just deciding where those pieces meet, and then helping to advocate for the employee piece.
Great, thank you for that. I think that does speak to the follow-up question around um, just the risks that could have been avoided when it comes to when you target the employee experience, what risks that can circumvent. So
Yeah. So
was
that's an
also,
interesting question. I'll just sort of mention too.
yeah.
It used to be that people were very, very focused on retention, right? So it was very hard to have employees retain at a company, and it was very expensive to replace them. And so therefore, how do we make them engaged and more likely to, stay at a company? Now I think it's actually much more about business results. So if I am talking about keeping my sales force engaged and happy at the company, it's usually because there's a target, associated with that. That if I can have productive sales folks, they will be more productive, they will stay at my company longer, and they will sell more, which affects my bottom line. Similarly, our customer success managers who are responsible for, responding to customers and helping them to be successful. If we make our customer success managers more efficient and more successful, that will have a direct impact on our customer success as well. So I think it's more drawing the line between specific communities of employees, rather than generically, we want our company to have retained employees. So I think it's finding those business levers.
That seems very applicable, especially in the sort of climate that we find ourselves in these days when it comes to employee retention. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Another question from the group. How do we balance designing for what users want or need versus what's ethical or beneficial for the broader system? Any thoughts on that, either AI related or not?
This is where we see the first caveat where I say I'm not an expert, right? Yeah. So I think I think that ethics is a whole other piece of the AI puzzle, that of course we can't ignore. But I think this gets into the how might we statements, right? So as we know in design, once we're through sort of the first of the double diamonds and we've explored the landscape and we've decided on what type of a solution we want to create, then that second diamond of exploration around how might we solve it, right? There may be 5 or 6 different great ways that we could solve it. And I think that might be partially where ethics comes in, right? Is there a more ethical solution within those 4 or 5 solutions that we might dream up? How might we test those solutions against each other and decide which one to follow? And then I think there's another question about the models, right? So I know I jokingly talked about the headshot that I used on the front page. I struggle with, that ethically, in the sense of I have never owned a tweed jacket and there's a tweed jacket in that picture. So aren't I lying by by showing a picture in a tweed jacket, right? Like, where's the line between something that is completely reality based and things that are, perhaps even better than reality? So I think it's an interesting point. I think my general answer would be ethics are super important. Decide where in your design process you're going to be thinking about them and talk about them, and then maybe be explicit. So similar to trust, deciding where and when you're going to talk about it, and then incorporate it into your process.
Great. Yeah, I think we're all navigating the ethical lines together as well. So good to hear that there is some iterative and stage related navigation going on for you. Another question here. Oh, any thoughts? Lots of people were weighing in on this, but thoughts on measuring trust? Any approaches or philosophies
I'd love
for
to hear if there are any in the chat. Are there any that grabbed you that you're like, oh, everybody's like, yeah, that's how we should do it. I'd love to hear your ideas.
Yeah, some folks were talking about some standardized measurements of trust. I believe Google's EAT, which is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness model. I know there are some standardized measures of trust out there. But what's interesting about trust is we have brand trust and then we have system trust. And aren't we all in this situation right now where system trust is widespread at risk as we're leveraging some of these natural language interactions and some of these AI models? So um, I think some of these standard measures of trust may need to be taken to another level given our circumstance.
Exactly, and I think that, a lot of that is self-reported, right? So it's more sort of qualitative data that we're then extrapolating and getting a large sample size, right? So, being asked, how much do you, trust this brand versus other brands? How much do you trust this data versus other data, and why? Those are all sort of self-reported. I think one of the interesting ways to think about measuring trust is going to be based on subsequent action, right? So because I trusted the system, I didn't go back and verify X, Y, and Z. Or because I trusted the system, I followed their purchase recommendation and bought that pair of shoes on Amazon that they said I would like, right? Because I trusted what they told me. So I think the actions that follow data and decision making will be a really interesting measure of trust as well, right? That conversion of purchase or that effect on brand is like a downstream indicator, which I think would be a really interesting thing to then track back to trust in the system.
Yeah. Just as you were speaking, we had someone in the chat chime in about going behavioral. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I wonder about how people may not be able to articulate that trust is what is driving some of their behaviors. So thanks
Yeah,
for weighing in, Agnes. I love that.
I love that. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at is that, I think self-reported data is going to be important as well. But again, if you're testing it with a strong hypothesis, you might say, how far can we push this, right? So, and we've all done this when you see, or let's say, a recommendation for you that's way off, like, why would I want that? You track back and you say, oh, maybe this is not something that I trust, versus something that feels much more personalized has then increased trust. So, looking at those as part of your hypothesis, would a personalized experience here build trust in this brand? Would it lead to purchase actions, et cetera? So I think it's going to be about building trust into our hypothesis testing as well. To your point, Danny, so that we get sort of that deeper understanding of the behavior that we're seeing.
Right. Great. One another follow-up question, digging into strong hypothesis, um, what kind of good indicators do we have for whether a hypothesis is present, and if present, whether it's like a strong, solid, actionable hypothesis?
Yeah. I don't have a great sort of global answer for that. I think it depends on how the company's thinking about experimentation. One of the things that we've been thinking on our team has been around documenting the hypotheses so that nobody enters an experiment without at least having one. It's sort of akin to, do we have a product requirements document? Do we all agree that we've done discovery and what that meant? I think it's almost like definition as part of your development process. I haven't seen anything that has a more global definition of how you create the hypothesis and a shared hypothesis that people, old fashioned term would be like signed off on, right? That people have agreed to. So yeah, I'm not aware of a standard on that yet, but maybe somebody in the chat does.
Yeah, folks, happy to collect your thoughts and feedback around
We
that.
could come up with one.
Riffing on like PRDs, it makes me think about you know, whatever your hypothesis statement is, if you can have some understanding of what that data would be. So that can help align stakeholders of, well, we're going to eventually be reporting this percentage in this sentence to you. Is that the statement you need to make your decisions, right?
Right.
Kind of like acceptance criteria.
Exactly, exactly.
So
I mean, and I think again, right now we're like throwing new technology at all kinds of problems. And so I think the more that we can, sort of stand on the things we've already learned about how to create great product experiences, the more they're going to apply to new technology, right? There's nothing wildly different about what we're trying to do here. It's just, it's just going to move fast.
gotta move fast, totally.
And Danny, I know you need a few minutes for at the end for other guild business. So happy to close whenever it makes sense for you.
Okay, well, questions are slowing down in the chat. I think this is a good time to sort of any closing statements or any closing questions folks have, get them in so we can answer them, and then we will do some networking breakouts for people. Lauren, I just want to say I think this is such a topical thing, especially getting into the details of how a machine learning based project can go wrong with some of these really common things that we all experience. Experimentation culture and having a strong team. Um, but you highlighting from your history what can still go wrong, I think has really elevated everybody's skills today.
Yeah,
So thank you
yeah,
for sharing.
absolutely. And I just want to like underscore. It looks like Agnes has one more question, so I'll let you
Okay.
take that.
Yeah,
I just want to underscore. We didn't really talk in detail about service design and service blueprints and journey maps, but I mean those are, I think, going to be some of the most important tools in our toolkits as we are navigating this area, right? So, again, reducing complexity means embracing it first, right? And then starting to understand how we can work with it. And so I think those are, again, in my experience, really important tools that we need to be sort of allowed to use in the right ways. So, yeah.
totally. That final question is your wonderful statement of research doesn't always slow us down, right? Just reprioritizes things. Any unpacking or more you would say to that, so we can all go forth and share that with our business leaders.
Sure, sure. I mean, I know that there's tons of articles, showing the value of user research, user testing, usability testing back in the day. But the idea is that as product and development teams are doing their work, right, as they're defining the systems requirements, as they are testing different ways of programming and developing the solutions, we can be doing that in parallel. We can create really low fidelity, sacrificial concepts, and then get feedback on those so that, again, we de-risk the engineering team building something that's not going to work for our customers, right? So the way that we do that is in parallel with the rest of the team, and it's not in a silo, it's not in a vacuum. We are transparent about what we're doing. It's just building that in as really another track so that it's not looked at as something later, something that's an add-on, something that costs us time, right? So whenever I hear the words, we don't have time, I'm like, we have time. Let's get creative, right? And so that's where, again, I think that all of us, dialing that up and not, that's the be relentless part, right? In a very, in as nice a way as possible, being relentless about the fact that we cannot ship something that we have not de-risked in some ways. And I think that's one of the keys.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, folks, we'll get into breakout rooms. I do want to conclude with our giveaway. So, Agnes, I think you had some really great questions. So, we will send you a copy of Lauren's book so you can enjoy that read. I think you'll like that one. Okay, so setting up networking breakouts for those of you who'd like to stick around, we just do small groups and you can join those sessions to further this discussion, get to know each other a little bit more, etc. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I will open up those breakout rooms in just a moment.
Awesome. And thank you, Danny, and thank you to the Guild for having me. This has been really, really fun. So thanks all, and feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn if anybody wants to talk further.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.